Welcome back. I got Michi McClure in line. How are you today?
I am very well, Michael. Thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Really looking forward to this conversation. You do some really interesting and incredible work. So I want to share a little bit about you and then we'll jump into the conversation.
A little bit about me. So I am what I consider a leader that never really set out to be one. It's not like I woke up one day and said, I think I'm going to open a company today. It just obviously just kind of evolved, as I'm sure it does for many people. But over time, I started to kind of ask myself, why is everybody coming to me for guidance, for coaching, for this? I guess I just kind of thought of myself as just one of the crowd, the wallflower. So why are they coming to me? And so I did some self reflection. Kind of really wanted to understand the patterns and why what it was that I was saying was actually successful to people. And I noticed that I kind of accidentally built a framework on what I was doing. I bucketed kind of like my advice and things like that. And I ended up doing a framework for what I call the human operating system. It was really not just for organizational growth, but it was for human growth as well. And what that means professionally is that I am the founder of Consivian, which is a consulting firm, just general consulting firm. But it was born from 4C compliance consulting. And 4C, compliance was a part of the framework that you needed to kind of scale. But in doing that self reflection, I realized that there was so much more. And I also have started a telemental health company that's still in stealth. But there's a core like commonality there, right? It's about building systems that feel growth from inside the organization. And it really looks about talking about one's authentic self, connecting with people, really connecting with people, not listening to just what they say or focusing on what you thought you were supposed to accomplish in the morning. And then using that internal data, whether that's your own personal data or your organizational data, to scale. There's a balance, and then people grow. And I think when people grow, the organization grows.
You had me at systems. I love organizations that really lean into the systems that work. And it's not just, okay, well, we bought this app and we drop it in and there it is. No, you have to understand who you are collectively as an organization. What strengths and gifts and desires do each of your team members from the CEO all the way down to the front lines, what do they bring? What do they currently have? What do they want to bring? There's so many people that want to do more in organizations, and we suppress them and we don't allow them to thrive and grow. And those are the people that just, when they get that opportunity, it can mean so much for a company. I think of innovators like 3M, for example, all the things that they've created over the decades, from the post-it notes to everything else that
Right.
they do. Think about those things. The post-it note was this glue that wasn't sticky enough to stick to and hold things together, but they're like, well, what can we do with this? And
Right.
well, you know, multi-billion dollar industry later just from, a side effect, kind of thing. And those are the opportunities. You allow your people to thrive. I like the phrase incubator. When I hear that phrase, I think, okay, this is an area where it just allows things to just kind of be and grow. And let's look at this and see how it works. And I find organizations that have that as part of their system tend to be very, very resilient when we have economic ups and downs or pandemics or tariffs or wars or anything else that gets thrown at us. Those are the organizations that go, yeah, we understand that's happening, but we're not necessarily going to participate in that. So I'd love to hear
Right.
your thoughts on that.
Right. You know, systems to me used to be just about, your policies, your checklist, those things that were really tangible and you could actually see them. And of course, like I said, with 4C compliance consulting, that was definitely a part of what you needed to do to keep a business healthy. Um, But when you start to look at some of your invisible systems, which is kind of like really where I think you and I are meeting here, um, those are the systems that organizations need to actually be stronger to evolve. If I were so great to be able to do it myself, well, I probably would, you know what I mean? And I think that a lot of CEOs, because you start out kind of, by yourself, and you grow, well, you have to understand that then it's not really just kind of dictating and telling people what your vision is. If you want the business to grow and you need people to come along with it, they need to feel like they're a part of that vision. And when you get people really excited and really connected, that's been my really big analysis lately, is how to connect the business and the mission and the values. A lot, it's a balance, it's definitely a balance. And so, some of the things that I really look for when I go into a company is the self. Let's talk about the person, and then the person and how you communicate, and then those data. Like I said, the organization has that too, and that kind of lifeblood is it's people. I think a lot of it has to do also with a leader being comfortable speaking truth to power, but also having the humility to listen to truth when it's spoken back to them. And even if it doesn't match what they thought that they were going to accomplish with this new business, um, listen to it, because it's sometimes the people that are in it every day on the ground, that know best, or maybe know fastest, that, hey, what you're getting ready to set up there isn't going to work. So I think it's really, really important that you have to develop an organizational culture where people feel free to say what is on their mind. That's the connection to the business and to others that I really think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, a couple examples. Well, one is Amy Edmondson from Harvard, the psychological safety. You want your people to have the freedom and the flexibility to say what they see. And I completely agree with you. You have to go where the work is being done. It's lean 101. It's
Right,
figure out
right.
where that is. And it reminds me of I used to be on some government committees in Canada for healthcare. Because the healthcare system in Canada is government funded instead of funded by insurers. Don't get me started on the pluses and minuses of healthcare.
Right.
There is no perfect system.
Nope.
There are some that do some things better than others, but they're by far perfection is not in the same sentence as healthcare. It just isn't. But we're doing the best we can. But I remember being on these committees, and they were government officials and leaders from a variety of different healthcare entities, whether it's hospital, primary care, mental health, you name it. So we have these committees, and we're like, okay, we're going to quote unquote redesign healthcare. And I'd look around the room, and yeah, there would be some nurse educators, and maybe some administration people that work in the hospital, or like I said, in clinics and whatnot. But I look around the room, and I'm like, I don't see anybody that has the initials MD at the end of their title. And why aren't they? Well, they couldn't meet at this time. Hate to break this to you, kids, but we need them at this table. And they were like, well, no, we can do it. So what they ended up doing is they come up with this great plan. Okay, now we're going to present it to the doctors. The doctors went in there like a surgeon and just carved that thing to there was nothing left. It was like roadkill and buzzards in a road. It was just nothing left of it. And everybody's like, well, what happened? It's like, well, we wasted how much time building this thing, knowing, and I knew, I'm like, all right, I gave the suggestion. I'm just gonna sit back here and I'm just, eat the popcorn. This is gonna be
Right. Yeah.
fun to watch. And it was. And, the doctors were gracious. I've worked with some doctors that were very gracious, and I've worked with some physicians that I wouldn't use that phrase, but they were gracious in ripping apart this thing and explaining in 40 different ways why it wouldn't work. And everybody went back, with their tails in between their legs and like, oh, we should, yeah, we just wasted a ton of time, taxpayer dollars, you name it. And again, it was when you want to push something forward, and there was nothing, and the doctors agreed with this. We understand what you're wanting to do here. We all want the same thing, we think, but we didn't involve the people, like you said, that are actually doing it that can say that will work well, or what about this? Come up with some ideas because, and I'll use an example that I refer to all the time. Interview I did several years ago with Maestro Roger Nierenberg, conducted orchestras and all that stuff, and he's a leadership consultant now. And what he does is he goes into organizations and he brings a small orchestra with him, and he'll get the employees and the management, all that stuff, and he sets up basically an orchestra pit with the music or the musicians and their instruments and all that kind of good stuff. And of course, he's elevated up on a podium.
Right.
So the pit, they first start playing, and of course, when they first start playing, they sound like a third grade band in September. This is the first time they've ever played anything. It's eardrums are going, please stop. And then they get their harmonies together, and everything sounds beautiful. And then what he does is he brings up groups of the employees and management up to the podium, and then he has the musicians play the same music. It sounds different up there. And he said, that's something you have to realize. What I see up here and hear up here is different than what you see and hear down there. Now,
Right.
somehow we have to get those two to communicate with each other to figure out what is the communication flow. And it was one of those things that stuck with me. And I'm like, yeah, I see it too often. Every day you can go on CNBC or Fox Business or whatever and watch business news and see, well, this organization's struggling. I'm like, well, I know why. They're not hearing, they're not speaking together.
Right. Yeah. The communication, it's the communication might be there, but it's not the connection, the true communication isn't there. Um, I, I really find it interesting. I think maybe a lot of it, and maybe that's why I'm so into self-reflection right now and encouraging other leaders to be reflective. Um, because I think that that's where they should lead from, not where they think they're supposed to be, because that's what other people have done before. I've had a lot of, you mentioned time with the doctors and, where they just couldn't fit in there. Um, Everybody has their piece and their part. And right, you're going to run up on issues where maybe everybody doesn't have a common time. Um, but then solve for that, engineer that out somehow, and figure this out. Because if you have, enough big brains in the room to have this meeting, if they're that essential to addressing X, they should be able to address something like, making sure that people have time to all get into the same room at the same time. And leaders seem to be governing by these rules that they think other people followed that made them successful. Something really simple like, uh, well, this is an hour-long meeting. We've got too many people because this is an hour-long meeting. Don't make it an hour. Make it not about your clock. Make it about what is going to solve your problem, whatever your problem is. Who says when something is too much? If it's too many, there'd be times when in my early days, when I'd have a full team there because somebody had something else, that the others didn't experience, and I didn't want to censor that out. I would much rather have too many people in the room, allow people to make their own decisions, feel free to say, yes, I think I have something to offer you all, leadership or not leadership. I have something to offer there. And yeah, I think that that needs to be managed, well managed, but that's what we get paid for, right? Is to also manage your business. It is a balance, but these rules that we just kind of keep following over and over again, I don't know. I have a tendency to say, no, that might not be the best way. I remember when I had my very first large staff, and I had over like, I don't know, it must have been like over 8 to 10 direct reports, somewhere in there. And of course, being human, you have your moments. And I would think that I would be doing just great. I'm trucking along and I'm answering questions and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And then every once in a while, I would hear like, gosh, Michi's kind of not herself today. Or maybe they didn't say it that nicely. I don't know. So I had this idea to put this giant, it was like a cardboard thermometer basically on the outside of my door. And it just basically went from hot to cold. And I would encourage people that when they came into my office and we had a meeting of whatever it was, that when they left, they would move that thermometer hot to cold on how they perceived me. Because too many times I was trying to guide based on these rules. I needed to meet this deadline and I needed to do this. And if I wasn't connecting with people, I wasn't really hearing them. And sometimes what they were basically saying, I think this was my first truth to power, right? I think what they were really saying is, you're not listening today. You're not being very nice. You're not, whatever it is. But I wasn't making this connection with them and doing it in this kind of odd, somewhat fun, colorful way with this thermometer that moved on my door, because it was a pretty giant cardboard, it took up like the whole door. I think was their way of starting to learn. I think I was training them without really realizing it. I was training them to speak truth to power. And it really opened my eyes, I think, just as much as it opened theirs. So there's a whole bunch of rules I think that CEOs and other leadership need to sit back and ask themselves, this is great. It worked for some. Is it working for me? Is it working for our business? And I think that that's because we don't take the time to sit back and actually take the pulse of our own business.
Or just take our own pulse and
Or
just,
exactly, or our own pulse. Right, right.
yeah, whenever you have an interaction, with somebody, it could be, interview like this, or it could be a conversation with somebody, or a meeting, or something like that. I've made it a point as much as I can remember. It's not like it's on my agenda item. Okay, take pulse.
Right,
it should be though. In my
right.
not the should all over everybody, but for me, I think that would be beneficial. But for me, it's like, okay, how did that go? Was I present? Did I was I responding to just respond? Was I trying to understand their point of view? Was I trying to put myself in their perspective as much as I could to see what they're seeing? Because a question I ask myself a lot, especially if I'm going through something, I'm struggling with something, or I'm like, okay, why isn't this working, or something like that? I ask myself, okay, what am I missing here? And I'm not doing it to condemn me or beat myself up. It's like, okay, I'm not seeing something here. What could that be? And then you can, ask, trusted advisor, what do you think I'm missing here? And they're like, well, yeah, you're missing this. Or they're like, I don't know. This one's a tough one. And
Yeah.
then you're like, okay, well, let's sit with it and see, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Going, all right, I'm not seeing this, but do we have enough to go anyway with this? And maybe it'll become clearer as we proceed. And just thinking about those, examples of a CEO meeting with, like in your situation, with one of your direct reports, and they're like, okay, you're thinking, okay, I wonder what temperature they're going to give me there, because you might catch yourself and go, ooh, boy, I think that one's going to be red. And then they actually mark it, and they said, no, you're warm and considerate. I'm like, but I'm not feeling warm and considerate.
Right.
And again, it's one of those dynamics where you may see that temperature gauge, and brilliant, by the way, for doing that, and go, I was warm. Yeah, I was, mimicking my nana, and how she used to, be really good with me, and my brother she was mean to, which he deserved it. But that's
Right.
another, just those kind of things.
Exactly.
But sometimes you're like, okay, and again, those are opportunities, and you can say, okay, you gave me a warm, and like, yeah, you were really listening. It's like, I felt that I was cold to you, and then you can unpack it and go, why do you feel that way? I didn't feel that. And,
Exactly.
and a lot of times it's because, this is just our brains. They love to go off in la la land, or the amygdala goes, "Hey, hi, remember me? Yeah,
Yep.
I'm gonna make you think about that thing that happened to you in 1996. Why? You know, I
And
was
not now.
And not now, yeah, not now. I don't need that. That's
Right.
not serving me. Why was it a scent? Was it somebody was wearing a shirt that reminded me of somebody in that situation, whatever it was in '96? Is
Right.
that what it is? So again,
And, and talk
regulating
about
yourself.
talk about like, don't you, Michael, as your chief burnout officer, right? Can't you see how kind of having that revelation and that reflection really helps to kind of reduce that burnout? Because I don't know, at least for me, probably at the end of that day, no matter how I was, kind of feeling earlier, um, had that feedback happen the way that you just explained, I'd actually been re-energized, refocused, recentered, and then had the encouragement, the internal encouragement to say, "Oh yeah, I can come back tomorrow and I can do this." And I'm going to make space for myself to be creative and to solve that problem. We don't give ourselves as leaders enough time to sit back and think. And again, that doesn't mean putting it in your calendar that says focus time and you're going to go and you're going to force yourself to have focus time, at that time. That doesn't always work. And so, I love the fact that you said, take the pulse of ourselves also, because that really is what it's about. Because as the leader, without you, the business is going to struggle. Yes, without them also, but you're the vision, you're the guide, you're the inspiration. They're going to look to you. So you need to be on point like at all times, and that means giving yourself some grace, grace and space to be authentic.
It's important. I think of the parable. I think that was attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I believe it was. It's like, okay, you're given 2 hours to chop down this tree. What are you going to do? Well, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm going to spend 90 minutes of it sharpening the saw.
Yep.
And because I could whack at this thing with a dull saw for
Right.
2 hours, and the tree's looking at you going, what are you doing? Where if I have a really sharp saw, that tree is going to come down a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great analogy for, taking care of yourself so you can be the best version you can. Every day is going to be different. Every day has new challenges. You're going to wake up and you're going to go, that's an interesting pain. Why do I feel that? Or you don't feel energetic. And there's other days where you're like, I'm ready to crush it. And it's Sunday. And you're like, I don't go in the office Sunday. All right. What do I do with it? What do I do with this energy? Uh, Use it for your benefit. Uh, and again, for people, that burn out and all of that, burnout is one of those things that happens innocently at first, usually, and then all of a sudden you're just overwhelmed. But I see time and time again a lot of people that are in similar roles. One person is on the highway to burnout real quick, and the other one will never burn out ever. It's just impossible for them to do that. And you go, what's the difference? And
Hey,
a lot of it is mindset, a lot of it is self-pacing, understanding their own needs. They kind of go at a pace. I tell people all the time, my favorite, or one of my favorite leadership books, is The Tortoise and the Hare. Well, who wins the race? The turtle. Yeah,
yep.
because they're taking it. They get there, they understand the things, and the rabbit's bouncing around like my 7-month-old puppy, just all over the place. And it's like eventually you'll get to what you want, but there's different approaches to it. But I think in closing, one of the things that I wanted to ask you too, is, you know, especially with, rebranding the organization, because you recognize, and I said this in the pre-show, and I want to make sure I make a point of it here, is so many entrepreneurs, when they have an idea, they want to launch a business or launch a product, and they say, "Okay, this is what it's going to be." And we put boundaries around it, not allowing it to just naturally morph into what it could be. And by you doing what you've done with the organization, it's obviously grown it to the point where we're addressing all kinds of different things because we see all of these pieces connecting together. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Um, putting the pieces together is the tough part, I think. I really do. And I think that's why I kind of came up with calling it a framework, because that's what's going to resonate with CEOs, especially CEOs that are trying to change and do some self reflection. Um, just because I can sit here and talk with you intelligently about systems and pulse and communication and connection still doesn't necessarily mean that anybody listening can just go to work tomorrow and just kind of implement this. And that's the tricky part, is to get the CEO, the board member, to ask for a different perspective. So many times leadership thinks that they need to have all the answers. And I think that's probably sometimes the worst thing that they can do. So I think that we need to ask, where are we healthy? Where are we hiding? Fix the hiding, do it all over again, but do it with everybody's perspective in mind. Um, and basically have that human operating system, I guess, that I just talked about, that I'm kind of really encouraging people to learn. And it's going to start with reflection. It has to start with your self-reflection. Um, Somebody said, when I first started doing this, somebody said, leadership is the only job where people try to upgrade everybody else's software before understanding what's currently running. Um, and that the way that that was phrased to me, it really resonated, that organizations and people, we run on feedback loops. And I really think that if we listen to our own software code, that we'll be in a better position to be creative and to figure out where our pain points are and evolve to the next level. Just like I realized that 4C was only a component of scaling a healthy organization, creating a healthy organization. And now it's, hopefully, it's full broad spectrum now, but I'm still sure that with every new client, with every new person that I meet, with every new leader, with every new podcast, I'm going to learn something different. And then I'm going to incorporate that and hopefully pass that down.
Beautiful. That's the best way to grow a business, is to continue to grow it. It's easy to do, but it's also unfortunately easy not to do. So
Yeah.
love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
So I am at consivian.com. Like I said, it's brand new. So there's a couple blog posts, but you can book services, you can book time, you can book a coaching session. You can just call just to say, hey, let's have coffee, and
There
just
you go.
kind of talk that way. And yeah, they can but all my contact information is there. Happy to help.
Awesome. Definitely have that in the show notes. So thank you for the work you're doing. The world needs you. So really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Appreciate it, Michael.